Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbite. And tonight we have Matt Cota, who is the owner of Meadow Hill Consulting, a sort of a new venture for Matt.
Year old.
Cool. Matt's going to be talking about some pending issues in Vermont, initially mostly on energy, I would think, and Transportation, those are good jobs. We worried about the price, the cost of fuel. Anyway, this is Matt Cota. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Pat.
Yeah, you're going to win the Been on the Show the Most award pretty soon.
Oh, great.
Which is good. I like that.
That's excellent.
He's a very good talker and really knows the subject matters that he's working on. So, Matt, in 2022, you founded Meadow Hill Consulting. And the tagline says, to provide management and advocacy assistance to Vermont trade associations that are focused on energy, transportation, communications, housing, and economic development, all the big ones.
Yeah,
Seriously, housing especially, and economic development. What's the 10% tax went up today?
Well, there's a through line through all those, right? You can't have economic development if you don't have people that are working, and you can't have people that are working here in Vermont if they don't have affordable housing.
Right. So it's all big circle.
And they need energy to get to their jobs, and they need heating fuel to stay warm when they're at home.
There you go. And you have many, I didn't write them all down, but you have many clients that you work with all over the spectrum. I think that's really great. You should really check out his website. It's very interesting. And so in keeping with the show's new format this year, we're going to ask Matt to spend the first 10-15 minutes without my talking. This has become a problem. I actually had to edit out one or two comments when Ben Kinsley was on, just to talk about the key issues so that you've got an unobstructed, unencumbered view from Matt's perspective of what's going on in our state, other than a 10% increase in taxes already. The child care bill.
Well, it depends on where you want to take this conversation, Pat. And I'm happy to be steered in any direction.
Nope, it's really. I know. I like the anything that's going to hit us financially, and that's transportation, and it's just all over the board, isn't it?
Well, it all starts with the big picture energy policy, which has been in place since the Shumlin administration, since 2011, which is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, to increase the amount of electricity used for transportation and for heat, and to make sure that that electricity that we use for everything comes from renewable resources. Those have been the energy debates, discussions, regulatory policy, laws that have taken in effect over the past decade and will continue for the next decade. And there are some things that have started and continue, and other things that have just passed, and we'll expect to see more action on them, and others that we fully expect in the near future, more regulations and laws in order to ensure that that dream of 2011, again, more electric heat, more electric transportation, more renewable electricity, as we proceed on that path. The biggest one, which I'm sure you've heard about and we've discussed before, which is the 2020 law, called the Global Warming Solutions Act. And that requires Vermont to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors, transportation, heating, agriculture, at all, by certain levels by three key benchmarks. By 2025, they've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 26% from 2005 levels. By 2030, so the end of this decade, they've got to reduce it by 40% from 1990 levels. And then in 2050, we're looking far, far out, we have to reduce it by 90%. So, but the real key benchmarks are how are we going to achieve the mandates in the law in 2025, and then how do you get to that big chasm to 2030? The way that we have been progressing in terms of increasing the amount of renewable power in our power supply, our higher miles per gallon cars and trucks, are the influence of electric vehicles, and through better efficiency standards and improving how we heat our homes, we actually may hit that 2025 mark. It's a pretty low benchmark, and it's likely that we'll hit it because our population has not grown substantially. Our industries have not grown substantially, and certainly COVID had the effect of changing some of our transportation patterns, which has lessened the amount of gasoline we consume in Vermont. And the weather and other factors have certainly impacted the amount of heating fuel we consume. So we're seeing the trend lines for heating oil and for gasoline and for diesel fuel. They continue to go down about 2.5% to 3% every year. But yet that is not at a pace that is commensurate with obtaining compliance with the Global Warming Solutions Act. So remember, that's the law passed in 2020, which says by 2030, Vermont, if you don't reduce your greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, anyone can sue the Secretary of Agency of Natural Resources, whoever happens to be at that time, and say you must take immediate action. And what that means is regulatory action, meaning not have to get a law passed, meaning you, the regulator, the Agency of Agency of Natural Resources, can impose a regulation to get to this goal through that lawsuit. That was what was set up in 2020. It creates this extrajudiciary system where you have the ability for a regulatory agency to impose restrictions on how we heat and how we have transportation. And for some, and of course anyone can sue and recover their legal costs. But many of the decisions made even before then are getting us there, right, Pat? So what do we have? We have a renewable energy standard, which says a certain percentage of our electricity must come from renewable resources. We have a clean heat standard, which passed in 2023, which requires heating fuel dealers to sell less heating fuel or else pay someone else to do it for them. We have a clean car standard and a clean truck standard, which requires the manufacturers of cars and trucks to deliver to Vermont new cars for sale that have zero emissions starting in 2026, where 35% of the new cars on the car lot in Vermont must have zero emissions. And then that scales up to a 100% of new cars in 2035. It doesn't require you or me or anyone else to buy an electric vehicle and make sure that it's registered as an electric vehicle in Vermont. But it requires the auto manufacturers to deliver for sale in Vermont an ever-increasing amount of electric vehicles. That is all that discussion about a clean heat standard, which essentially has fuel dealers paying upwards of 70 to 75 cents a gallon more and having their customers pay it, or else convince their customers to use less of their product. You have a situation where car dealers the cars on their lot that they pay for, that then have to resell, will be required to be of zero-emission vehicles. Now, if customers want to buy them and they sell really fast, they're not going to complain. But if they don't, they're going to have a difficult time staying in business. Heating fuel dealers, if they don't diversify, they will have a very difficult time staying in business. And from the perspective of those that saw what happened in 2011 and said, that's good, we want less fossil fuels, we want to eventually eliminate our dependence on petroleum. The problem is that if you move faster than what the public can reasonably comply with, then you're going to have a disintegration of the way we distribute what is an essential commodity. Heating oil, propane, kerosene are an essential commodity in this cold rural state. Gasoline and diesel fuel are an essential commodity in this cold rural state. And if we make it impossible for anyone to retail that product, to sell that product, to consume that product, and there's not an adequate substitute before that occurs, we're going to be in real trouble. So that's what we're going to try to avoid. And that's the reason I get up in the morning and go to work.
And I have to tell you, I had so much trouble not interrupting because you said so many things that are like...
You can interrupt me anytime,
red
Pat.
flags. I mean, anyway, thank you very much for that summary, Matt. I really appreciate it. We're just going to take a few second break, and then we'll be right back with Matt to ask some in-depth questions. And there you go. We'll be right back. So this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont. And I'm here with my guest, Matt Cota. And now we're going to turn the tables a little bit on Matt and ask some serious questions. Really, let's start. Where do I start? You mentioned, well, the one thing that comes to mind at the big flood that we just had, there was a car dealership on 302, and I forget the make, and I apologize.
Nissan.
Nissan?
Yeah.
they had a lot of electric vehicles on the lot, and they got wet,
Yeah.
dead. And they had to be carted out, they had to be towed out, not started and, battery put in and start off. Nope, they had to be towed out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was a challenge for
That was
a
bad.
handful of dealers on 302 and in Lamoille Valley,
Yeah.
in Hardwick
there's
area.
some downsides to electric.
Oh, sure, but the big picture is if the equipment manufacturers, the Fords, the GMs, the Stellantis, all the major manufacturers, if they can produce vehicles at a rate that the customers want to buy that complies with this regulation, they will.
Right.
And if the customers in Vermont want to buy them, and they are required to deliver them to Vermont because Vermont adopted this clean car regulation,
Right.
then those dealers will benefit.
And
However,
Go ahead.
if the consumers don't want to buy them,
Too bad.
they can still go to New Hampshire and buy them new there.
Interesting.
And we're already seeing the impact of this regulation. Even though the regulatory teeth, meaning the fines,
Right.
won't occur until 2026, we're already seeing implications in our marketplace because of the regulations. So if you are if you manufacture a certain brand of a vehicle and you know that you can bank early credits by moving more electric vehicles in a state like Vermont, which
Right.
has the California regulation,
Right.
you're more likely to move those cars to those states so that you can get credit for that. So you want to sell cars in California, you want to sell cars in Vermont, states that have these regulations. New Hampshire, which doesn't have these regulations, you're free to sell the gasoline cars there. You might sell more of them there. So how you get your allocation of vehicles is important in terms of meeting the customer demand, but it's also important for the manufacturer because they have to meet the regulatory requirement, or else pay a fine.
We're not going to see much gasoline in Vermont then, are we? I mean, if we buy our gasoline car in New Hampshire, where do you fuel up?
Well, so where we're at in the gasoline industry is, we used to sell 350 million gallons of gasoline in Vermont every year to consumers. That is now below 300 million gallons a year, and that has an effect on the revenue that
Right.
the state collects to pay for the roads, right? So there's about 52 cents a gallon that just goes to tax. About 18 cents goes to the federal government. The rest, about 32 cents, goes right directly to the state of Vermont, which pays for the transportation fund, the purchase and use tax, which is on every sale of vehicles. That goes into the transportation fund and a little bit to the ed fund. So yes, there are people, and there are a lot of people out there that just like the ease of picking up their phone and dialing the website of a billionaire who's going off into space and having it show up in a brown box. And isn't that wonderful? We cut out the middleman. Well, guess who the middleman is? It's our friends and neighbors.
Right.
It's people we go to church with.
Right.
People that we serve in student council, Little League, and all that. And the reality is that if we're just ordering everything that we consume, everything that we need on a phone to some faceless billionaire who's just looking for a rocket ship to space, we're losing something in Vermont. We really are.
Right.
And I'm afraid that in that rush to get some satisfaction, immediate satisfaction and gratification, and get the best deal, you're missing out on what's the most important deal, which is working in your local community, buying local. When you're on your phone buying from some faceless website, it is not buying local.
Do you know what I found out? And I don't mean to get us off topic because we'll go right back on it. But for all of the businesses that were flooded out and struggled to get back, the last quarter of the year, which is like now, or no, last week, they have to make enough money to get them through the last quarter and the first quarter of 2024 because it's very slow then.
Right.
It's after the holiday. And I was trying so hard on a couple of other media things I do to encourage people to buy local because these people, they have to make it through. Otherwise, come spring, we're going to see some empty stores again. And it's not going to be because of the flood.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to be able to finance it. Now, you mentioned that the demand is down since COVID. Don't you think eventually it will, I mean, we all like spending. Don't you think it will eventually go back up?
For gasoline.
Yeah, I mean,
So
We're starting to travel more.
well, there's the factors are this. You've got COVID with changed our travel patterns for commuting.
Right.
So there was an initial rush for people to buy extra vehicles because they didn't take public transportation because of COVID, right? Then you had that demand.
Oh, interesting.
But then you saw the travel as more people accepted work from home.
Right.
Not everyone can do it, but those that can, that gasoline consumption went down. But also happening concurrently and constantly is the increase in the miles per gallon as we retire the 10, 15, 20-year-old cars that got 8 to 12 miles per gallon, and they're being replaced with, trucks now are getting 15, 16 miles per gallon. The best cars getting in the 20s, 20, 25, 28 miles per gallon. As you're seeing that happen, then the demand goes down. You're also seeing part of it, not the whole story, but part of it is, of course, the increase in the number of electric vehicles. Right. So it's about battery electric, hybrid, pure electric vehicles, which is no gas tank at all. Those numbers are up to 10% of the new vehicle fleet.
They haven't figured out how to tax electric vehicles, have they yet?
So they still pay the purchase and use tax. They still pay the registration fee.
We all do that.
But yes, we all do that. But the electricity that goes into the battery is not taxed the same way that gasoline or diesel fuel that goes into a tank in a vehicle is.
As I was leaving the house today, my husband yelled at me, and ask him about when they're going to start taxing electric vehicles.
So as we think about how to tax electric vehicles in order to pay for their fair share of the road, road repairs, because they have 4 tires and a heavy chassis, and they need to, it all drive the roads the same way that gasoline-powered cars do, regardless of the powertrain. But as we think about that, the challenge is number one, you've got all sorts of other cash incentives, financing incentives, tax credit incentives to buy electric vehicles. Right, so the government is doing, from the federal government to the local utility to the state government, is doing everything in its power to lower that sticker price because they want more people to buy electric vehicles, because that's part of their mission. But at the same time, we want those owners of electric vehicles to pay their fair share of the road tax. So those are two competing interests, right? And then you have the complication of, well, how do you tax it? Do you tax it when they buy the vehicle? Well, then you only get the money from those that register their vehicle in Vermont, the electric vehicle. You don't get the out-of-state money. Well, then do you just tax it when they fill up at the public charging station, like outside Montpelier, or at the gas station?
Right.
Well, then you'll get the tourists charging up, but you won't get the people that charge up at home, which we think, based on our research, is about 60 to 70% of people that own electric vehicles charge their vehicles not at the public station where they put in a credit card and you could do it, but actually at their house where they plug it in overnight, or at their place of work. So how do you get that revenue source? So there's 3 legs of the stool, opportunities but this is controversial, which is vehicle miles traveled, something called VMT.
Yep. I actually like that one myself personally.
And vehicle miles traveled is a recognition. The taxing a gallon of gas is, if you get a really efficient vehicle, then you're technically paying less to use the same roads, even if you drive the same amount as someone with a less efficient vehicle, because they're buying more gasoline or diesel fuel. You're driving the same amount, but they're paying more.
And how do you get the tourists with the? How do you catch them?
Right, so then you'd have to have, that's another problem. So you'd have to have some sort of cooperative arrangement with neighboring states, or really the whole country. You could see a system nationally where every car that is registered to drive in the contiguous United States had a vehicle miles, and there would be some sort of way to do it. But that would take an enormous amount of cooperation with the other states. Could you do it regionally? Perhaps. Perhaps. There is a system for heavy-duty trucks called IFTA, International Fuel Tax Agreement, which if I fill up a big tractor trailer carrying milk and drive it to Boston, if I'm in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, get a portion of that tax to pay for the wear and tear on the roads on the way there. So there is a system that exists for diesel fuel, but diesel truckers have to write down, record everywhere they go, and consumers may not be willing, or regular people driving pleasure cars may not be willing to do that.
Maybe the Easy Pass system could be manipulate it a little, because they sure know we use it to go back and forth to Maine, and they got us every time.
And that is a fundamental issue that and I'm not weighing in on this.
Yeah.
I'm just identifying the
Right.
potholes,
Yep.
as it were, and the political potholes, which are, if you were doing a system like that, you would be able to track every mile. But some people would say, I don't really want the government to know where
That's
I've been
true,
and where I'm
right.
going.
It's none of your business.
So
Well,
that's
they
the
have a point
reality.
there. Yeah. I have to tell you really quickly. We came back from lunch when I was at Motor Vehicles, and there was this gorgeous cherry red Hummer in
Okay.
front of our DMV. And I went in and I looked around the room and I saw this guy, looked like GQ,
Yeah.
kind of matched the Hummer. I went over and I said, "Is that your Hummer outside?" And he said, "Yes, how did you know that was mine?" And honest to God, I don't know what was more expensive, the clothes he had on or the Hummer.
Right.
So it wasn't easy, it wasn't hard
Right.
to spot. And I said, what? He said, "I'm registering my Hummer because I have a home here." I said, "Don't bother. I thought that's what you were doing, because your state will get to us at the end of the year, and we'll give them your name, and you'll pay twice."
Yep.
So he left and thanked me. I thought that, no, so many people do that. They try to, but the state gets you. Yeah, I think he came from New Hampshire, and every year we'd get okay, who from New Hampshire registered their cars, because they have homes here.
Right. So speaking of that, I mean, one of the things that happened on January 1 is the fees went up for everything.
Yep, everything, 20%.
20%. And every chance I get, I remind people that the commissioner of the DMV and the governor of Vermont was not supportive of that initiative. They didn't ask for the money.
Right.
They didn't need the money.
Yep, it's just their turn, according to the legislature.
Right.
See, I have an argument with them every year. They call it fees. I call it a tax.
Right.
If you put a tax on every single DMV whatever, boat, car, blah, 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 that's a tax, because you're hitting, there's nobody you're not hitting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care what, and they never challenge why they're asking, and I never was asked to justify a tax increase. And they're supposed to do that. You're
Yeah.
only supposed to increase it for the amount that the department spent. Do you know that?
And there's also and no one really, well, I'm going to say it anyways.
Go ahead. Who listens? I mean, you never know.
Whenever you make a change in government, right, there's these unanticipated consequences, and there's also real costs that are separate and above from any tax or fee. So for instance, every single car dealer now has to contact their computer software operator, and all of that has to be recoded.
Right.
And you might say that's just the cost of doing business.
Right.
True.
Right.
But it was never part of the calculation when we figured out what if we're raising fees 20%.
Right.
What is the cost every time? Every time those things change, there is a cost involved to those that want to do business.
You are correct.
So.
Anyway, well, we're getting into politics here. Serious. This is cool. It's a great way to vent.
That's why I come on your show.
That's right. So are they, I really want to get onto some other issues here, but are they thinking about just dumping the hybrids? Because if I had to buy one of those things, I would go with the hybrid, because it makes me feel like there's a plan B comfort level there.
No, hybrids are very popular sellers.
Yeah.
And, cars are like any consumer product. It's cyclical. So if a year ago, there was a waiting list to get a certain all-electric truck, right?
Right.
Now
Right.
you can just walk on the lot
Right.
and choose your color.
Correct.
I mean, it's so
Right.
things change, right? And this is the chasm. So the chasm in electric vehicle adoption is where you get from the early adopters who don't care what the price is, they are going to buy an electric vehicle because they believe in it. And oftentimes they have a second vehicle that's a hybrid or
Right.
a gasoline powered vehicle, and they have that ability. It's a 2-car family or a 3-car family.
Right, right.
So that gets you to that 5 to 6 to 7%, which is where we are now. Getting to 15% we're on the trajectory to get there as well. New cars. But remember, used cars stick around a whole lot longer than they used to.
100,000 is just warming up, right?
Yep. The engines last longer, the bodies are lasting longer, even with all the salt brine. I know it's a pain in the butt, but cars are lasting longer.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to move a car out of the system because it gets sold and then it gets sold and then it gets sold again. And to get to that 35% number, which is what the requirement is for new cars on Vermont lots in 2026, that is a chasm, right? To go from, if we're at 10% now and then we get to 15 in the next year, that would be an aggressive jump. But then to get to 35, that is, you are doubling your
Right,
sales.
right.
And the product may be available, but if the consumer can't afford it or doesn't want it, then we've got a problem.
Really?
Yeah.
I was just, you know what just dawned on me? When you first were just with the Fuel Dealers
Yeah.
Association, then you went to VEDA, which is the
Yeah.
Vermont Automobile Dealers. They used the initials and changed the
Yeah,
name,
yeah.
but it used to be the Vermont Automobile Dealers.
Yeah.
And I thought, but they are so connected.
They are, yeah.
Well, you just said in a couple of sentences how they're intertwined. What a great move for you to do that, to bring your knowledge to both.
And if you think about the gasoline marketers, convenience store operators, they are dabbling in charging vehicles.
Right.
They're figuring out, can we put a fast charger on our property and get people and make money?
Right.
Because that's what they're in the business for.
Right.
And get them to get in our store and to get frequent return visits, get the tourists to come through. So they're experimenting with electric vehicles. Car dealers who, you don't sell a car without a full tank of gas, and they often have facilities on site for
Right,
that.
right.
They also have to have charging facilities on site
Yep.
because you can't sell an electric car without
Right.
a full battery. So the connection between the fueling
That's great.
infrastructure,
Perfect.
the energy, and the product. So
Right.
same with like another client of mine, which is the heating cooling contractors of Vermont. They're the ones that install the equipment in your basement that provides hot water, cool air,
Right.
or heat.
Right.
Boilers, furnaces,
It's all
air
connected.
conditioners, and they're all connected because they all need power and fuel
Yeah.
in order to run, and sometimes both. And of course they're essential.
That's great.
And when the floods happened, they were out straight,
Yeah.
making sure that after the mud went away, that the equipment was working. If it wasn't working, to get it replaced.
Yep.
Because everyone wanted a hot shower, and they knew that in a short 4 months that they would want hot air.
Yeah, really.
So
Wow, that's really fortuitous of you and VEDA to make that connect. I mean, everybody's intertwined. That's
yeah,
great.
truly.
You have to have a special, for the batteries, you just can't use your regular house power, right? You've got to have a special connect, or have they changed that?
So, yeah, so there's different types. There's level 1, level 2, level 3 chargers. Level 1 is
Plug it in
plug
here.
it in here and
Right.
wait 18
Really?
hours, and you'll have, it takes
Yeah.
forever.
18 hours.
Right.
That's the clue.
Right.
Like,
Level 2 is the type of power that you might have on an electric dryer or an electric
Oh,
stove. It's
right.
that 3-prong
Yep.
system, and you have to have enough amperage. So that's the service to the panel. So think about if you go in your basement, you've ever had to flick the breaker because you've had too many light
Right.
sockets plugged in,
Yeah.
or whatever you had plugged in oh shoot, the lights went out. You go down, you flip the panel on the breaker. You're not getting enough service, meaning you're not getting enough juice from the street to the panel, which is then dispersed to all of your different appliances.
right.
Many homes, especially those built pre-1980, and we've got a lot of them here in
Yeah.
Vermont, they haven't upgraded their service panel to accommodate for air conditioning,
Right.
electric heat pumps for heating in the winter, electric water heaters, and for a level 2 charging system
Right.
for their house. So one of the most booming businesses to be in, not just in Vermont, but any place that has these policies, is electricians.
Yeah.
Because even if you're,
Tech centers, go become an electrician. Sorry.
because you are, a little ad there.
Yeah, really.
Seriously.
No, I mean, people, this is a great business.
Because all these service panels need to be upgraded. And
Yeah.
if they're upgrading their service panels, they're likely going to want air conditioning or electric heat
Yeah.
to supplement their oil or gas. They may want an electric car charger as well. So there's a tremendous amount of work to be done in the home.
Right,
And that will be
right.
done by contractors, licensed contractors, electricians, plumbers, heating techs.
Yeah, you have to be, when the electric vehicles first started. Howard Dean was governor. And I was in motor vehicles, and they gave me a truck to take home. So, I don't know. So, okay, plug it in.
Right.
I went in the house, my husband and I went in the house, and we heard this noise. Boom! We had a level 1.
Yeah.
And we needed something a little bit bigger than a level 1. I almost blew up the house.
Well, you also probably needed a bigger service panel.
Right. We now have 2 or 3. I don't know what's down there. He keeps adding. Every time we buy something, we have to add a panel. But I almost burned the house down because nobody told me that. They just gave me the truck and off I went.
Well, we know a lot more today
Yes,
than we
we
did.
do. I'm
than
sure
we
it's
did back
much better.
then.
This was 10, 15.
But
maybe
that
20
doesn't
years.
negate the fact that you need the electricity.
Yeah.
In order for it to be clean, you need
Right.
you need to come from a clean source,
Yeah.
right? And then you need the infrastructure, not just the poles and wires on the streets, but in the homes, that make it all work. So
Right.
not to use the metaphor, but it's not like flipping a switch here.
No.
You may have all the cash and all the subsidies and the tax
Yeah,
credits and
but-
the initiatives and the gumption
Yeah.
to convert Vermont's homes to electric heat and to convert our transportation sector to electric cars, but the infrastructure is not just one thing; it is many things, and they're all interconnected. And if one part of that isn't connected, the consumer is going to say, "No, I'm going to stick with good old reliable
Right.
oil heat."
Well, I
or
didn't
I'm going
even
to stick
plug
with
it
good
in.
reliable gasoline.
I didn't plug that car in all week. I sort of told a fib when I got back to work. Great car, works great. I wasn't going to plug it in my house. I was like, nope, forget that. I watched Fox this morning. I watched Fox, sorry. But anyway, they had a reporter who had flew out, I think, to California, and he was going to fly back, and they asked him to rent a Tesla and to drive back.
Sure.
And Tesla provides you with where's the next charging station, how long can you go. I think the trip was 800 miles, he said, and he had to stop 6, 7 times. And so so I'm interested to see how much time he has to build in to that trip. So if you want to get back, what's today? Tuesday. If you wanted to get back Friday, maybe you had to leave last week.
Right.
How long does that take? Because some of them take a while.
Yeah, and this is a reporter or someone on taking a fun trip.
Right.
We have a lot of commerce that runs on our roads.
There's a point.
Particularly the dairy industry.
Yep.
And if you think about a truck, right? So big tractor trailer truck.
Right.
Those are $250,000
Right.
vehicles, and you don't just fire it up when you want to go to the beach, right? This thing is a workhorse that is working in
Yep.
some cases around the clock.
Yep. Time is
Stopping
money.
only for fuel and food,
Yep.
and with multiple drivers. Because you can make a truck run 24 hours. The
right.
driver can only work 8 to 10, but the truck can keep moving. And you don't have the time to move the goods that you
Yeah,
need to move
right.
with the speed in which the consumer demands if you have to stop for 2 hours
Right.
to fill a battery.
And want to use the word fresh.
Right.
Wow.
So those are some of the concerns, particularly for those in the timber
Yep.
and the dairy industry
Yep.
that has a product that needs to get to market with certain, well, it's particularly in the food industry where
Yep,
you
right.
need to get it to the market.
Yeah.
And you have an industry that, you'd much rather have them drive a newer, higher MPG diesel engine than driving an old
Right.
diesel engine
Right.
without the pollution controls on it. But yet our policies are not just to get you out of a gas burning Toyota into
Yep,
into
right,
electric
right.
Toyota, but also to move the market when it comes to heavy duty trucks, class
Yeah,
4,
right.
class 6, class
Right.
7, class 8 trucks, which are not just the delivery vans, but also the major tractor trailer trucks. So the Vermont Clean Truck Regulation requires that we go to ever increasing numbers of new electric or zero emission vehicles delivered to our lots of our truck dealers.
And are they caught up in this, in our 2050 requirements, the
So-
trucks too?
So the trucks and the cars are caught up in what's called the California Air Resources Board, or the
Right.
CARB, Clean Car
Right.
Regulation, which Vermont adopted just as soon as California adopted it,
Right.
which requires, which is essentially a signal to the manufacturer saying, you need to manufacture zero-emission vehicles, and our state will only accept those, or you'll pay a fine, and that fine will go
Great.
to, it's alternative compliance payment. Other states have just said, yeah, that's a California, Vermont
Right.
thing, go ahead and do whatever you want to do, but
I
that's
don't know
not
what our
us.
fascination is with California and Oregon on
I know,
occasion.
again. But there is federal regulations that are under consideration that would do something similar across the country, but those face a lot more backlash than decisions made in Vermont or California or some of these other states regarding this. So it's unlikely that that will come to pass, although it could.
This is a very fascinating topic, seriously. I hope they talk a lot about it this session, because there's a lot of answers that need to be addressed, questions that need to be addressed.
Well, I think one of the most important questions that will be addressed with regards to energy, there's something else that we can talk about too, but
Yeah, go ahead.
the biggest one will be the results of this Renewable Energy Standard Working Group. And this is the
Right.
group that it will determine what in fact we should require as a state,
Right.
our electric utilities, what kind of energy that they must procure in order to put it into their wires and send it to us so we can power our lights, power our TV equipment, power our computers, and power our cars and our air conditioners. So that will be I think will move, and it will be a requirement that they meet a renewable standard for the electricity they buy, and it will have very specific instructions on what types of electricity that can come from. Right, so defining what a renewable, what a local renewable is versus an out-of-state renewable.
And this is something the legislature put together, renewable energy.
So it's a
What's it
working
called?
group
Yeah.
that has met off session. They'll deliver a
great.
report in January, and it's likely to be a big topic of concern for a utility, or a windmill, or a solar power producer, or that this is
Right,
real business
right,
for you.
right.
They've got to work that out. For the consumer, the concern is always, okay, well, what does this cost? Because ever since Governor Snelling created the Public Utility Commission,
Right,
and
Remember
put Dick
that?
Sodek in charge,
yep,
ever since then, the whole point of that, before the legislature used to set the rates of electricity.
right, right.
So that was something, that was a vote that was
Yep.
made. And then Governor Snelling said, no,
Sodek.
let's put the Public Utility Commission, let's create a Public Utility Commission and
Right.
let them be in charge of reviewing contracts. And that has been largely a success.
right.
The point of that has always been, what is the least cost? We want to make sure that the power companies are purchasing power and they're negotiating the best contracts so that they can deliver the lowest price costs to consumers.
Right.
That has flipped. There's still a concern, still important, but also of equal importance is where that power comes from, whether that power plant
Right.
produces greenhouse gas
Right,
emissions,
right.
and how greenhouse gas emissions are defined. So we call Hydro-Quebec, which we receive a tremendous amount of power, 30 to
Right.
40% of our power comes from Quebec hydro plants,
Right,
hydro plant, and that's defined as renewable. Even though it's large-scale hydro, it's defined as renewable. Not so in other states. We define wood-burning power plants, the Rye plant and
Right.
the McNeil generating plant in Burlington, we define that as renewable, even though
right.
that does release greenhouse gas emissions when the wood combusts. Not other states don't do that. So how you define renewables
Weird.
is really important, and then how you state what percentage of those renewables must come from in-state generators. Now that's an important piece of business, right?
Right.
Because if you could just buy all of your power from windmills in New York, or in Cape Wind, or from the hydro plant up in Quebec,
right,
that might be the least cost. That might qualify as renewable, but it wouldn't be
local, right,
and so
Wow.
McNeil, the wood burning plant would be considered local, or Rygate would be considered local. A solar or wind that's produced in Vermont would be considered local. So working out that percentage, how much should come from local, how much should come from renewable, what percentage could come from nuclear, what percentage can come from wood burners, what percentage can come from large-scale hydro. All of that is important because as we think about electricity, we've spent 20 years, right, doing what? We created an efficiency utility just designed to get people to use less electricity. You used to be
So
able
here
to
we are.
you used to have an electric water heater.
Right.
And the power company would pay you to take it out and put in a propane water heater. That flipped, right? Now you can no longer get a rebate for your oil, no matter how efficient it is, your oil or propane water heater, but you can for electric. So now we went from do whatever you can to turn those lights off and use less electricity, even if it means using propane or heating oil. Now it's the other way. It's like we're going to incentivize you to use more electricity so you can use less of that.
When
And that happened
we
under the
bought
Shumlin
our house,
administration.
it had electricity in it within a week,
Right.
gone, because it was so expensive at the time.
Right.
Very expensive. Wow, I didn't even think about that.
And that is what has
The worm
happened.
turns.
And that is what has happened over the last 50 years, which is, dating back that. In the 1940s, the 1930s, we used wood and coal largely to heat our homes. And then what happened is kerosene and heating oil came into the marketplace. And all those coal burners, not all of them, we still have some of them, but most of them went out. And you no longer had soot and all that smell, and you had clean burning oil heat, and that really took off in the 1950s, all the way up into the 1970s, where 90% of the homes in Vermont, Pat, in 1970, were using oil heat to stay warm.
Wow.
Right, so that number is now about 40%.
Right.
So we've lost half our market share over the past 50 years. In what has increased? Natural gas, because there's a pipeline that came in the 1950s from Canada, and that fossil fuel is thrived. They now have 50,000 customers. Propane went from being a niche fuel for cooking into something that's used for all sorts of different, for drying, for snow melt, for heating, for water heating, all of it. Gas fireplaces that really took off. So propane has increased, natural gas has increased, oil heat has gone down. Wood has remained constant. About 15% of the marketplace, people still heat with wood. Usually it's a supplement, some other source of heat, but some use it entirely. Electricity is still at 3%, but climbing in numbers. But we see electricity as being something that augments another heating source, whether it's natural gas, propane, heating oil, or wood. Electricity will be used in combination with those heating sources, especially for older buildings. New buildings, not so much. Most new buildings will go all electric. But we have a vast amount of existing housing stock that is over 40 years old, that has working equipment in there, and the idea that you're going to convert that without $30,000 in weatherization, without $14,000 in new equipment, a lot of people are going to balk at that.
I think I can hear it now at my home.
But that's what the whole clean heat credit standard, back to the law that was passed in 2023 that will be implemented in 2025 if the legislature deems it appropriate, which is it's to convince people like you to say, yes, you're probably on your way to Florida or on your way to wherever you're going, but before you get there, we think you should invest tens of thousands of dollars on a new heating system, even though your one that you use right now works perfectly well, because this one uses slightly less fossil fuels and a little bit less greenhouse gas emissions. And you'll say, well, okay, but I don't have $25,000 to spend on it. They say, well, you'll get this coupon. And you'll say, what's this coupon? Say, it's called a clean heat credit. Like, what do I do with it? I'm like, well, every quarter, if someone called an aggregator will come knocking at your door and will buy that from you, and will then sell that to a fossil fuel provider. Well, how do I find this aggregator? Oh, they'll find you. They'll find you. They'll inject themselves as a middle person in order to aggregate your clean heat coupon and sell it to a larger company that doesn't have enough coupons. Well, how much is my coupon worth? Well, that depends on what the market will bear. It sounds like a crazy way to run a rodeo, doesn't it?
I'm not kidding. My head is spinning.
This is what the legislature passed. This is what the PUC is supposed to do.
People don't know this.
I've been appointed to the technical advisory group of the PUC for the Clean Heat Standard and the equity advisory group. So I have a front row seat to all
Right,
this.
right.
The stories I could tell would last more than an hour.
We got 9 minutes.
Well,
so all summer you've been dogging this. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And for the next year.
For the next year. So the Public Service Board is charged, I think, is it every 3-4 years to come up with an energy plan, right? The last
The
one
Department of Public Service.
Yeah, Public Service.
Yep.
They did that in 2022, and I looked through it briefly the other day, knowing you were coming on, and a lot of the people that you represent this is big for them, energy plans and all the stuff you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, they must be having you follow it like a dog with a bone.
Well, things are stayed remarkably consistent in terms of the sea change that happened in 2011, which in 2011 we went from, under the Shumlin administration, we went from a philosophy of using less electricity.
Right.
And making sure that we had least cost, to using more electricity and making sure that electricity comes from renewable resources that doesn't emit greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're now a decade plus into that policy, and it all depends on how you measure it. Like we measure it on, you can measure it on car sales, you can measure it on sales of gallons, you can measure it on sales of electricity, and you could paint a different story depending on what perspective you have. But the reality is that the overwhelming number of cars on the road burn fossil fuels. And the overwhelming number, the majority of houses and buildings in Vermont burn fossil fuels.
Right.
And no amount of coupons
Right, good luck.
is
Good luck
going
to
to
them.
change that dynamic unless you make the cost of using those fuels so expensive that
You're forced to do it.
I may only be in this house for 5 more years, but boy, I've got to borrow to get $25,000 in order to upgrade my heating system, even though the one I have works perfectly well. If they make that's the old carbon tax, right?
Right.
So the clean heat credit system is a way to get to that number, to artificially increase the cost of the product that you're using now that the government doesn't want you to use, so that you'll be convinced by the market to buy something that doesn't.
And is this a commitment that you think in the legislature, people in the legislature, regardless of who we elect, do you think that commitment will last through elections and that'll just keep growing, and that this is something, who is committed to this?
It's so hard to tell, because talking to my good friends in the legislature that voted for this,
Yeah,
they say, "Oh, Matt, it's just a study."
yeah, right, good luck to that. It's
And
not.
I said, "This is
Yeah,
not a
they
study."
don't believe that,
I've
do
never
they?
been a part of a study that has cost taxpayers $2 million,
Right,
that you have so many very
Yeah.
large moneyed interests
Yes.
fighting over the repercussions of it, and that is already changing the marketplace.
yes. And they told them what to study, if memory, it's not like study, whatever, come up with alternatives. They told them what to study, did they not?
Right. And be quite frank with you, I mean, there are some that are worried about chaos in the marketplace, worried about people not having gas for their truck, worried not having oil to heat their home. And I worry about that too. It keeps me up at night. It keeps me getting up in the morning and doing my job. But there is a perspective, and I think it's a minority, a very small minority, that chaos in the marketplace is not necessarily a bad thing, because if you break something, then you got to fix it, and then you'll fix it in a way that you want it
And they're breaking
fixed.
us.
But there are real lives on the line here.
Yeah, right.
And if you don't have a choice, if you don't have an option, if you can't get fuel at 2 a.m, if there's no gas station between where you need to go to get to work and to where you live,
Right?
that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's not a problem that's going to be fixed by government, because if there is no way that an honest person can make a living selling a fuel that customers need to buy,
Right.
then they can't do it. They won't do it.
Matt, I didn't know half of this stuff. I'm very excited that you came on today, because it's making my head, I'm serious, I didn't understand this. People, I'm sort of a regular person, if I don't understand it, and I'm sort of in it,
Right.
people don't understand this. How will we make them understand how it all fits in? What's the purpose? What's the reason? And what are the benefits and the the not benefit. I mean, what's the downside? Who's going to tell them this?
Well, I mean, they'll be told when they get out their wallet, right?
Great.
So if we
Right.
create a renewable energy standard that requires us to get bespoke power from certain sections of the
Right.
of the county, and the rates go up, people won't say, "Oh, yes, but it's supporting that windmill on the
Right.
side of the road." They'll say, "Oh, I'm paying twice as much for my electric bill." If they can't go to their local car dealer and get the car that they want to buy
Right.
because of regulation,
Right.
then they'll go elsewhere, or they'll end up paying whatever they have to pay. Same with heat. And these are, I mean, there's nothing that, I mean, this is, I mean, you probably hear the passion in my voice, but there's nothing more fundamental than your transportation and your home, right? I mean, what defines us
right,
many times
right.
as Vermonters.
Right.
We have a high rate of home ownership, and we drive an awful lot
And we all like our big cars.
because we live in a
Right.
cold rural state.
Yep.
I mean, we have more dirt roads than we have paved roads in Vermont. I mean, I try to explain that to people, our friends that live out of state, and they're like, "How does that even compute?" I'm like, "Welcome
Yeah.
to Vermont."
Somebody posted in Calais, a friend of mine posted pictures of her road, because we met for lunch. She said, "I'm sorry I came out, because it's miles and miles of these ruts and the cars being pulled this way and being pulled that
Yeah.
way. And unless you drive it, you don't understand, right?"
No, you don't.
Yeah.
That's very true. It's very true.
bad.
So these are fundamental decisions that will happen as you talk about, well, how people are going to find out. Well, they'll find out if they're paying more, and when they're paying more, they'll complain. And this whole exercise in developing these coupons is really about avoiding what was the preferred method of raising the cost of fossil fuels, which is a carbon tax.
Right, right.
So a carbon tax is relatively simple compared to this clean heat standard. This clean heat standard, this coupon system,
Right.
is a lot more challenging to implement, to enforce, to monitor, and to understand for people that want to comply. A fee, or tax, we know what those are. We've seen those coming and going. You tell us what it is, and we pay it. This is different. This is a little bit more insidious.
Gee, thanks, Matt. Do you put out any kind of a report
Yep.
that like I could get a hold of? I
Yeah,
mean, if you sign up, because this is serious stuff, and I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, so Meadow Hill has a sidearm media company called Meadow Hill Media, and meadowhillmedia.com, and we publish a weekly Meadow Hill View, which is information of interest about the energy,
Great.
transportation, economic development, housing, telecom markets.
Cool.
Yeah, check
You
it
will
out.
see my name on it tomorrow, because I don't know anybody who covers I mean, this stuff in such detail, and you understand it. And you can translate it to people like me, so thank you very much. We have to have you back, because we didn't talk about housing, and you've got GBIC that you represent too,
Well,
don't you?
we need housing because
for sure.
if we want businesses to move to Vermont, to expand to Vermont, to grow in Vermont, they need a place where
For
their
sure.
employees can live.
Affordable is the word before
Affordable, but all
housing.
scales, from
Yep.
apartments to duplexes to
Yep.
condos to single families, and find out a better way that we can get people to Vermont, because we're not doing so well on property taxes. So we can look at the other way, which is figuring out how to lower the
Right,
cost of
right.
construction so we can
Yeah.
put more housing stock online.
I had a friend of mine who sold his home and built his retirement home in Vermont. He wanted to stay there just when the construction prices, I mean, he couldn't have timed it any better. And I talked to him, and he was so upset about the cost and availability of construction materials.
Right, sure.
It's not there. I don't know where it went, but and then the price is way
Yeah.
sky high.
Yep, wood, steel. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
And labor.
Yeah. Oh, well, where are the workers?
Where are the workers?
Everybody that you represent must worry about that.
Everyone, from the telecom people that are installing
Yeah.
lines to construction to high-tech companies to plumbers.
Yep.
Everyone needs
Yep, there's-
people. And we're graying, in many of these trades, we're graying out faster than we're bringing new ones in. So there's a great apprenticeship program,
Yeah.
but it's you need a master electrician to train a apprentice electrician.
Right,
Well,
right.
not every master electrician as they wrap up their career, wants to be a teacher.
Right.
And frankly, there's not enough of them to train the amount of electricians we need. So
Right.
we're working with the legislature on ways that we can encourage people of similar industries that have similar skills, like heating techs,
Right.
oil and gas techs, to be able to get through the line a little bit faster, so we can start delivering all these services that the consumers want, and the government needs, but
Yeah, I
just
do.
we can't get
Matt,
there without us.
We have sadly run out of time.
okay.
I had it, we'd do another hour, because you've got me all jazzed up here. I can't believe it. Thank you for what
Thank
you
you
do.
very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
coming on, and thank you for tuning in. Please pay attention and sign up for Matt's weekly report? monthly report?
MeadowHillMedia.com.
Weekly?
Yeah.
Excellent, do it, because you need to understand this stuff. This is Pat McDonald, host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Thanks for tuning in.